Judge Vanessa Richardson closed her laptop with a sigh. The day had been long, filled with case reviews that would determine the fate of many who stood before her bench in the federal circuit court. Her shoulders ached from the weight of responsibility she carried. At 52, she had earned every gray hair that now streaked through her dark curls. The clock on her dashboard read 9:47 p.m. as she pulled out of the courthouse parking garage. The streets of downtown were quiet on this Tuesday evening. She looked forward to a hot cup of tea and the novel waiting on her nightstand. Tomorrow would bring another day of difficult decisions. As she drove through the dimly lit streets toward her home in the suburbs, Vanessa noticed the blue and red lights flashing in her rearview mirror. She checked her speed, 38 in a 40 zone. Her turn signal had been used properly. Registration and insurance were up to date. Still, she felt the familiar knot form in her stomach as she guided her black Audi to the curb and stopped. The patrol car parked behind her, its headlights almost blinding in her mirrors. Vanessa did what she had taught her son and daughter to do. She placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen and waited. 23 years on the federal bench hadn't erased the lessons her parents had taught her about police interactions. Officer Richard Kellerman approached the driver's side window with a flashlight, pointed directly at her face. The beam was unnecessarily bright, making it impossible to see the officer clearly. Vanessa squinted against the harsh light. "License and registration," he demanded without greeting or explanation for the stop. "Good evening, officer," Vanessa said calmly. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" The officer's posture stiffened. "License and registration first." "Of course," she replied. "My registration is in the glove compartment, and my license is in my purse on the passenger seat. I'm going to reach for them now if that's all right." Officer Kellerman didn't respond, just kept the light trained on her face. Vanessa slowly reached for the glove compartment, keeping her movements deliberate and her right hand visible. She retrieved the registration and then carefully reached for her purse. "I didn't see a turn signal back at Maple Street," he finally said, though Vanessa knew with certainty she had used her signal. "I understand. But I did signal," she replied politely as she handed over her license and registration. She noticed the officer's nameplate and badge number, committing them to memory out of professional habit. Officer Kellerman studied her license, then looked at her face again. His flashlight still pointed directly at her eyes. "You're a long way from your neighborhood, aren't you?" he asked, though her address was in a suburb just 15 minutes away. Vanessa took a deep breath. "I'm on my way home from work, officer." "Work? At this hour?" His tone suggested disbelief. "Yes, I often work late." She kept her voice even, fighting the urge to mention her position. Years of experience had taught her that in some situations, that information could escalate rather than de-escalate an encounter. "What kind of work has you out this late in this part of town?" The question came with an edge, as though her presence needed special justification. "I work at the courthouse downtown," she answered simply. Officer Kellerman's flashlight beam moved around the interior of her car, lingering on her briefcase with its court seal partially visible. "Step out of the vehicle." "Please," he suddenly ordered. Vanessa felt her heart rate increase. "May I ask why that's necessary, officer?" "I've provided my license and registration as requested. Step out of the vehicle now." His hand moved to rest on his holstered weapon. "Officer Kellerman," she said, reading his nameplate again. "I've complied with your request and I'm not legally required to exit my vehicle without cause. Could you please explain why you need me to step out?" His face hardened. "When an officer gives you an order, you comply. That's how this works." "I understand, but I'm simply asking for clarification," Vanessa replied, working to keep her voice steady despite her mounting concern. "Last warning, exit the vehicle or I will remove you." The officer's voice had risen and his hand was now gripping his holster. Vanessa weighed her options. De-escalation seemed the safest path forward. "All right, I'll step out. I'm going to unbuckle my seatbelt now and open the door slowly." As she carefully got out of the car, Officer Kellerman immediately stepped too close, invading her personal space. Vanessa was a tall woman at 5'9", but he towered over her, using his height as intimidation. "Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle," he ordered. "Officer, I don't understand what's happening." "I've been cooperative and you haven't been answering my questions," he cut her off. "When I ask you something, you need to answer directly and immediately, not question my authority." "I have answered your questions," Vanessa responded. confusion evident in her voice. I told you I was coming from work at the courthouse. And what exactly do you do there? Janitor, security? You need to be specific when an officer asks you questions. His tone was dismissive, mocking. Vanessa felt a flash of anger but suppressed it. I work in the legal department, she said, still choosing not to reveal her position. Hands on the vehicle now, he shouted suddenly. Startled by the volume and aggression, Vanessa turned slowly and placed her hands on the roof of her car. The metal felt cold against her palms. Spread your feet, he instructed sharply. Officer Kellerman, I want to be clear that I do not consent to any search of my person or vehicle, she stated firmly, knowing her rights even as she complied with his positioning request. The officer laughed, a short, unpleasant sound. Sounds like someone's been watching too many YouTube videos about their rights. When you're acting suspicious in this neighborhood at night, I have reasonable suspicion. What specifically about my behavior has been suspicious? Vanessa asked, maintaining her composure though her heart was pounding. Instead of answering, Officer Kellerman roughly grabbed her wrist, twisting it behind her back with unnecessary force. Vanessa gasped in pain. This is excessive force, she stated clearly, loudly enough that it would be captured by any recording devices. I've been compliant and posed no threat. Stop resisting, he shouted, though she wasn't resisting at all. I am not resisting, Vanessa replied, her voice steady despite the painful grip on her wrist. There are cameras on your patrol car and your body, Officer Kellerman. They will show I've been cooperative throughout this encounter. At the mention of cameras, he hesitated momentarily but didn't release her wrist. You know what? I'm tired of your attitude, he said, pulling out his handcuffs with his free hand. Maybe a night in a cell will remind you how to properly respect an officer. As he began to cuff her, a second patrol car pulled up behind them, its lights flashing. An older officer stepped out and approached them. Everything okay here, Kellerman? The new officer asked, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. Just dealing with an uncooperative subject. Lieutenant Hayes, Officer Kellerman replied, still holding Vanessa's wrist painfully behind her back. Lieutenant Hayes looked at Vanessa, then at her vehicle and back to Officer Kellerman. I'll take over from here, he said in a tone that allowed no argument. Officer Kellerman reluctantly released Vanessa's wrist. She slowly brought her arm forward, rubbing the sore joint. Ma'am, I apologize for any inconvenience, Lieutenant Hayes said, his tone professional. May I ask your name? Vanessa straightened her posture, maintaining her dignity despite the humiliation of the situation. Judge Vanessa Richardson, Federal Circuit Court. Officer Kellerman's face went pale. The night air seemed to grow completely still around them, the only sound the soft hum of the patrol car's engines and the distant noise of traffic from the main road. Judge Richardson, Lieutenant Hayes said with evident surprise and immediate recognition. I'm very sorry about this misunderstanding. Officer Kellerman stood frozen, his earlier confidence evaporating as the implications of his actions began to register. The blue and red lights continued to flash across their faces, illuminating three people whose lives were about to become far more complicated than any of them had anticipated when the sun had set on what had seemed like just another ordinary day. Lieutenant Hayes stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between Judge Richardson and Officer Kellerman, whose face had drained of all color. The lieutenant's 23 years on the force had taught him to recognize when a situation was about to spiral out of control. This was one of those moments. Judge Richardson, please accept my deepest apologies, Lieutenant Hayes said, his voice carrying the weight of professional concern. Are you all right? Do you need medical attention for your wrist? Vanessa rubbed her wrist, feeling the tender spots where Officer Kellerman's grip had been too tight. There would be bruises tomorrow, but nothing was broken. I believe it's just bruised, she answered calmly, though inside she was still processing what had just happened. Lieutenant, I would like to know why I was pulled over in the first place. Officer Kellerman mentioned a failure to signal, but I can assure you I signaled at every turn. The lieutenant nodded, his expression grave. We'll get to the bottom of this, Your Honor. Officer Kellerman's body camera and dash cam will have recorded the entire encounter. Behind him, Officer Kellerman shifted nervously from one foot to the other. The mention of the recording seemed to increase his discomfort. Judge Richardson, Kellerman began, his tone completely transformed from the aggressive one he'd used just moments before. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Officer. Lieutenant Hayes cut him off sharply. Return to your vehicle and wait for me there. Now. Kellerman hesitated for just a moment before complying, walking back to his patrol car with stiff, reluctant steps. The change in his demeanor was striking. The confident swagger replaced by the cautious movements of someone who suddenly realized they were standing on thin ice. Once Kellerman was out of earshot, Lieutenant Hayes turned back to Vanessa. "Judge, I want to assure you this incident will be thoroughly investigated. Officer Kellerman is relatively new to the force, but that's no excuse for what happened here." Vanessa looked toward the patrol car where Kellerman sat, his silhouette visible behind the windshield. She thought about the countless defendants who had stood before her bench over the years, many of them sharing stories of police encounters gone wrong. Stories that were too often dismissed as exaggerations or lies when the officers gave conflicting testimony. "Lieutenant," she said, her judicial temperament returning as the initial shock of the encounter faded, "I want the body camera and dash cam footage preserved immediately. Not just from Officer Kellerman's vehicle, but from yours as well." "Of course, Your Honor," Hayes replied promptly. "I'll personally ensure all recordings are secured." "Good, and I'll need the incident number and your badge number as well," she continued, her voice steady. "I intend to file a formal complaint." Lieutenant Hayes nodded, writing down the information on the back of his business card before handing it to her.
"Judge Richardson, if I may."
"Officer Kellerman has had some issues with his approach to traffic stops before. Nothing that reached the level of tonight, but there have been concerns." Vanessa took the card, noticing how carefully the lieutenant had chosen his words. "Previous complaints that were dismissed?" she asked directly. Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "Let's just say there were situations that perhaps deserved more scrutiny than they received." The weight of his admission hung in the air between them. Both understood the implications, that Officer Kellerman's behavior tonight wasn't an isolated incident, but rather part of a pattern that had been allowed to continue. "I see," she said finally. "Lieutenant, am I free to go now? It's been a long day and this encounter has made it considerably longer." "Yes, of course," Hayes replied. "Would you like me to follow you home? Just to ensure you arrive safely?" Vanessa almost laughed at the irony, being offered protection by the same police department that had just subjected her to unwarranted aggression. "That won't be necessary, thank you." As she returned to her car, Vanessa caught a glimpse of Officer Kellerman watching her from his patrol car. His expression was no longer one of arrogance, but something closer to fear. For a brief moment she felt a flash of satisfaction at his discomfort, then immediately chided herself for the thought. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. The drive home took just 15 minutes, but it felt much longer. By the time Vanessa pulled into her driveway, her hands were shaking. The adrenaline that had kept her composed during the encounter was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and something else: anger. Inside her house, Vanessa placed her keys and purse on the entryway table and leaned against the wall, taking several deep breaths. Her wrist throbbed, and when she pushed up her sleeve, she could already see the darkening marks where Kellerman's fingers had dug into her skin. She took out her phone and carefully photographed the developing bruises, documenting them from multiple angles. Then she walked to her home office and sat down at her desk, opening her laptop. While the encounter was still fresh in her mind, she began typing out a detailed account of everything that had happened, from the moment the police lights appeared in her rearview mirror to her final exchange with Lieutenant Hayes. At 11:30 p.m., her phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Diane Foster, the Chief Judge of the Federal Circuit. "Vanessa, I just got a call from Police Chief Wilson," Diane said without preamble. "He mentioned there was an incident tonight involving you and one of his officers." "Are you all right?" Vanessa wasn't surprised by the call. News traveled fast when it involved a federal judge, especially in situations like this. "I'm fine, Diane," she answered, though fine wasn't entirely accurate. "It was an unpleasant encounter, but I'm home safely now." "Wilson is beside himself," Diane continued. "He asked if you'd be willing to meet with him tomorrow to discuss what happened. I told him I'd pass along the request, but that it would be entirely your decision." Vanessa considered the offer. Part of her wanted to refuse, to proceed directly to filing the formal complaint and let the system do its job. But another part of her, the part that had spent decades working within that system, knew that sometimes the most effective changes came from direct engagement. "Tell Chief Wilson I'll meet with him," she decided. "But I want the department's legal counsel present, and I'll be bringing documentation of the encounter." Are you sure you don't want representation yourself? Diane asked, concern evident in her voice. I think I can manage, Vanessa replied with a hint of dry humor. I do have some legal experience. After ending the call, Vanessa returned to her account of the incident, finishing it with meticulous attention to detail. Once complete, she printed a copy and placed it in a folder along with the photos of her wrist. Tomorrow would require all her professional composure and legal expertise. As she finally prepared for bed, Vanessa found herself thinking not about Officer Kellerman or the upcoming meeting with Chief Wilson, but about all the people who experienced similar encounters without the protection of a federal judge's title. People who weren't believed when they reported excessive force or racial profiling. People who didn't have chiefs of police calling them with apologies. Her encounter tonight had been frightening and humiliating, but she had resources and recourse that many others did not. That knowledge settled on her with a sense of responsibility that felt heavier than the weight of her judicial robes. Morning arrived too quickly. Vanessa had managed only a few hours of restless sleep, her mind replaying the encounter and rehearsing what she would say to Chief Wilson. Her wrist ached as she dressed in one of her more formal suits, not her judicial robes, but clothing that commanded respect and conveyed authority. The bruises had darkened overnight, forming a distinct pattern that clearly showed where fingers had gripped too tightly. She considered covering them with makeup or a long-sleeved jacket, but decided against it. The bruises were evidence, and she would not hide them. As she drove to the police headquarters, Vanessa noticed her heart rate increasing. Despite her years on the bench, despite knowing she had done nothing wrong and had all the power in this situation, she still felt anxious approaching the building where Officer Kellerman worked. It was a visceral reminder of how traumatic such encounters could be, even for someone with her position and resources. Chief Wilson was waiting in the lobby when she arrived, along with a woman Vanessa recognized as the department's legal counsel, Teresa Garcia. Both looked solemn and slightly uncomfortable. Judge Richardson, Chief Wilson said, extending his hand. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us today. I want to personally apologize for what happened last night. Vanessa shook his hand firmly, noting the way his eyes flickered briefly to the bruises on her wrist before quickly looking away. I appreciate the apology, Chief Wilson, she replied evenly, but I think we have a lot to discuss beyond just last night's incident. The chief nodded, gesturing toward the elevator. We've prepared a conference room where we can speak privately. As they walked together, Vanessa couldn't help but notice how different this treatment was from what she had experienced just hours earlier. Now she was Judge Richardson, treated with deference and respect. Last night, to Officer Kellerman, she had been just another black woman to intimidate and control. The contrast couldn't have been clearer, and it strengthened her resolve about what needed to happen next. The conference room on the third floor of police headquarters was designed to impress, with its polished oak table and city skyline views. Vanessa had been in rooms like this before, usually when providing legal education to law enforcement or during her earlier days as a prosecutor. Today, however, she was here as a victim seeking justice. Chief Wilson gestured toward a chair at the head of the table, a subtle acknowledgement of her status. Teresa Garcia, the department's legal counsel, sat to the chief's right, a notepad and tablet in front of her. A third person entered the room, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair whom Chief Wilson introduced as Deputy Chief Thomas. Judge Richardson, Chief Wilson began once everyone was seated. I've reviewed the preliminary report from Lieutenant Hayes, as well as the body camera footage from last night's incident. What happened to you was completely unacceptable, and I want you to know that Officer Kellerman has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Vanessa nodded, noting that the chief had used the word incident rather than misconduct or assault. Careful language, but predictable. I appreciate that quick action, Chief, she replied, opening the folder she'd brought with her. However, I'm concerned that administrative leave might be insufficient given what occurred. She slid the photographs of her bruised wrist across the table. The marks had darkened overnight into distinct fingerprints. The visual evidence far more compelling than any verbal description could be. Teresa Garcia leaned forward slightly to examine the photos, her professional composure briefly slipping to reveal a grimace before she regained control of her expression. Deputy Chief Thomas's reaction was more visible, a sharp intake of breath and a muttered curse under his breath. These photos were taken last night and this morning, Vanessa explained, her voice steady. As you can see, Officer Kellerman used excessive force despite the fact that I was compliant at all times. Chief Wilson picked up one of the photos, studying it with a frown. Judge Richardson, I can't express how deeply troubled I am by this. I've also reviewed the dash cam footage, which clearly shows you using your turn signal, contradicting Officer Kellerman's stated reason for the stop. So he lied about the reason for pulling me over, Vanessa stated flatly, not as a question but as confirmation of what she already knew. The three police officials exchanged uncomfortable glances. It was Deputy Chief Thomas who finally spoke. Your Honor, the footage raises serious concerns about Officer Kellerman's conduct, including his justification for the initial stop. I'd like to see the footage, Vanessa said. There was a moment of hesitation before Chief Wilson nodded to Teresa, who tapped something on her tablet. The large screen on the wall came to life, showing the view from Officer Kellerman's dash cam. Vanessa watched herself driving through an intersection, the yellow flash of her turn signal clearly visible before she changed lanes. The timestamp showed 9:51 p.m. Moments later, the patrol car's lights activated, and she could be seen properly signaling again before pulling over to the curb. The footage then switched to Officer Kellerman's body camera as he approached her vehicle. Watching the encounter from his perspective was surreal. Vanessa saw herself sitting calmly with hands on the wheel, heard her own polite responses to his increasingly aggressive questioning. The camera captured everything, his unnecessary flashlight beam in her eyes, his hand resting on his weapon, his escalating demands. When the video reached the point where he forced her arm behind her back, Deputy Chief Thomas looked away, his discomfort evident. The audio picked up Vanessa's clear statement. This is excessive force. I've been compliant and pose no threat. Chief Wilson stopped the video as Lieutenant Hayes arrived on the scene. The room fell silent for several long moments. I think we've seen enough to understand what happened, the chief said quietly, his earlier defensive posture noticeably diminished. No, Vanessa said firmly. I'd like to see the rest. Teresa and Chief Wilson exchanged glances before the video resumed. The change in Officer Kellerman's demeanor after learning her identity was stark, from aggressive enforcer to nervous subordinate in the span of seconds. When the video ended, Vanessa sat back in her chair, letting the evidence speak for itself. Your Honor, Chief Wilson began, clearly choosing his words with care. On behalf of the entire department, I want to offer my sincere apologies for this inexcusable behavior. I assure you that Officer Kellerman will face appropriate consequences. What would those consequences typically be, Chief? Vanessa asked. Not for an officer who mistreated a federal judge, but for an officer who behaved this way toward any citizen? The question hung in the air. Chief Wilson cleared his throat. Each case is evaluated on its specific circumstances. Let me be more direct, Vanessa interrupted. How many similar complaints has your department received about Officer Kellerman? And how many resulted in any meaningful disciplinary action? Deputy Chief Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Teresa Garcia's pen hovered motionless over her notepad. Judge Richardson, Teresa said carefully, there have been 3 prior civilian complaints against Officer Kellerman in his 18 months with the department. 2 were determined to be unfounded after investigation, and 1 resulted in additional training on de-escalation techniques. I'd like to review those complaints, Vanessa said. With all due respect, Your Honor, Teresa responded, slipping into her role as legal counsel. Personnel records are confidential and, Ms. Garcia, Vanessa cut in, I'm fully aware of the legal protections for personnel records. I'm also aware that patterns of misconduct can be revealed through proper discovery and civil litigation, which is one avenue I'm considering. The implied threat of a lawsuit changed the temperature in the room immediately. Chief Wilson leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. Judge Richardson, what would you like to see happen here? We want to resolve this appropriately. Vanessa had anticipated this question. During her restless night, she had considered various outcomes from demanding Officer Kellerman's termination to filing criminal charges for assault. But her years on the bench had taught her that lasting change rarely came from single, dramatic actions. I want 3 things, she said, her voice calm but firm. First, a thorough investigation of Officer Kellerman's conduct, including review of all prior complaints against him, regardless of their official disposition. Second, a comprehensive review of your department's traffic stop protocols, with special attention to racial disparities in enforcement actions. And third, I want to be personally involved in developing improved training for your officers on implicit bias and appropriate use of force. Chief Wilson blinked, clearly having expected demands focused solely on Officer Kellerman's punishment. That's quite extensive, he said cautiously. What happened to me last night was not an isolated incident, Chief Wilson. We both know that. The only unusual aspect was that it happened to someone with the power and resources to demand accountability. Deputy Chief Thomas spoke up. Judge Richardson, implementing these changes would require significant departmental resources and time. Yes, Vanessa agreed. It would. And the alternative, a federal civil rights lawsuit from a sitting judge with clear video evidence and physical injuries, would require even more resources, take even more time, and cause significant damage to public trust in your department. The room fell silent again as the three police officials absorbed her words. It wasn't a threat. It was a reality they couldn't ignore. Finally, Chief Wilson nodded. Your terms are reasonable, Judge Richardson. I'll need to discuss the specifics with the mayor and city council regarding resources, but you have my commitment to pursue all three of your requests. I appreciate that, Chief Wilson. I'll expect weekly updates on your progress, Vanessa replied, and I'd like copies of the video footage we just watched before I leave today. Teresa made a note on her pad. We'll have that prepared for you, Your Honor. As the meeting concluded and arrangements were made to provide her with the evidence, Vanessa felt a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in having her concerns taken seriously, but also a deep sadness that her title and position were required for that to happen. Outside the building, Vanessa checked her phone and found several missed calls from her clerk at the courthouse. Court was scheduled to begin in an hour, and despite everything that had happened, she had cases waiting for her attention, people whose lives would be affected by her decisions today. Driving to the courthouse, Vanessa's thoughts returned to Officer Kellerman. She wondered what would happen to him now. Termination seemed likely given the circumstances, but would that really solve the underlying problem? Would it prevent similar situations in the future, or just remove one symptom while leaving the disease untreated? As she parked in her reserved space at the courthouse, Vanessa noticed a news van near the entrance. Word had gotten out about last night's encounter. She sighed, knowing that what had begun as a personal ordeal was about to become public, with all the scrutiny and political complications that would bring. For a moment, she sat in her car, gathering her strength. Then Judge Vanessa Richardson smoothed her jacket, checked that her judicial collar was straight, and stepped out to face the cameras with the same dignity and composure she brought to her courtroom every day. What had started as a routine traffic stop had become something much larger, a test of the system she had served for over 2 decades, and perhaps an opportunity to improve it in ways that could benefit everyone, not just those with a title before their name. As Vanessa approached the courthouse steps, microphones appeared before her like spring flowers after rain. Reporters called out questions, their voices overlapping in an urgent chorus. Judge Richardson, can you comment on your encounter with the police last night? Is it true you were physically assaulted during a traffic stop? Will you be filing charges against the officer involved? Vanessa had anticipated this moment during her drive from the police headquarters, preparing a response that would be measured yet honest. She stopped at the base of the courthouse steps and turned to face the cameras. Last night, I experienced what too many citizens in our community have faced, a routine traffic stop that escalated unnecessarily, she began, her voice calm and clear. While the physical marks will heal, this incident highlights serious concerns about police procedures and accountability that affect us all. I've met with Chief Wilson this morning to discuss these issues, and I'm committed to working toward meaningful improvements in police-community relations. A reporter pushed forward. Judge Richardson, do you believe you were targeted because of your race? The question hung in the air. Vanessa took a measured breath before responding. I believe what happened reflects broader systemic issues that need addressing. My focus now is on ensuring that the encounter I experienced leads to positive changes for everyone in our community, regardless of their title or position. I have court cases waiting, so I won't be taking further questions at this time. Thank you. With that, she turned and ascended the courthouse steps, ignoring the shouted follow-up questions. Her clerk, Philip, met her at the entrance, concern evident on his face. Judge, are you all right? We've been hearing rumors all morning. I'm fine, Philip, she assured him. though the ache in her wrist told a different story. But we may need to adjust the schedule a bit. I'd like to review some materials before we start this morning's session. In her chambers, Vanessa found a stack of message slips on her desk. The top one was from Congresswoman Alicia Washington, who represented their district. Another was from the head of the local NAACP chapter. 3 more were from major news networks requesting interviews. Vanessa set the messages aside and opened her laptop. She needed to focus on the cases before her today. A sentencing hearing for a white-collar fraud case, arguments on an evidence suppression motion, and a status conference for a complex civil rights lawsuit. The irony of that last item wasn't lost on her. A soft knock at the door interrupted her preparation. It was Chief Judge Diane Foster. "Vanessa," Diane said as she entered, closing the door behind her. "I just saw the news vans outside. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," Vanessa replied, gesturing for Diane to take a seat. "Though I suspect things will get more complicated before they get simpler." Diane nodded, her expression somber. "The administrative office of the U.S. courts called. They're concerned about the publicity and potential security implications, and I've had 3 calls from other judges wanting to know what happened." "Word travels fast," Vanessa observed. "In this case, yes, particularly since someone leaked partial body camera footage to Channel 4 News this morning." Vanessa felt a flash of anger. "Already? That was fast." "Too fast to be coincidental," Diane agreed. "I suspect someone at the department wanted to get ahead of the story." The leaked footage complicated matters. Vanessa had planned to be deliberate and strategic in how she addressed the situation publicly, but now that control was slipping away. "What did the footage show?" she asked. "From what I saw, it included Officer Kellerman's approach to your vehicle and the moment he twisted your arm. It cut off before Lieutenant Hayes arrived. Selective editing, then, showing the confrontation but not the resolution or the officer's reaction when he learned who she was." Vanessa wondered who had chosen those particular segments and why. "The court's public affairs office is being flooded with media inquiries," Diane continued. "They've prepared a standard statement about the judiciary taking the matter seriously, while respecting the ongoing investigation, but they wanted to check with you before releasing anything." Vanessa appreciated the courtesy. "That's fine. A neutral statement is appropriate at this stage." Diane hesitated, then asked, "Have you considered taking a few days off? No one would question it under the circumstances." "No," Vanessa said firmly. "I have cases scheduled and people who need their day in court. Taking time off now would only feed the narrative that this incident is somehow more important, because it happened to a judge." Diane nodded, understanding. "If you change your mind, just let me know." "And Vanessa, off the record, what you're doing matters. Not just for yourself, but for the integrity of the whole system." After Diane left, Vanessa took a moment to center herself before court began. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter Alexandra, a second-year law student at Georgetown. "Mom just saw the news. Are you okay? Call me." Vanessa sent a quick reply promising to call that evening, then put her phone away. It was time to put on her judicial robe and do the job she had sworn an oath to perform. The morning session proceeded smoothly, despite the distraction of what seemed like an unusually full gallery. Vanessa noticed several unfamiliar faces who appeared to be reporters rather than people with business before the court. She maintained her usual judicial demeanor, firm but fair, allowing attorneys to make their arguments while keeping proceedings moving efficiently. During the lunch recess, Philip brought her a sandwich and an update on the growing media storm. "Judge, the story has gone national. It's on all the major networks, and Honor Judge V's officer is trending online. The courthouse security team has implemented additional measures due to the increased attention." Vanessa thanked him for the information and ate her lunch while reviewing briefs for the afternoon session. She was determined not to let the situation disrupt her work, though she couldn't help but wonder what Officer Kellerman was experiencing today. Was he watching the news coverage? Meeting with his union representative? Worrying about his career? Or perhaps he was angry, feeling that he'd done nothing wrong and was being unfairly targeted because of who she was. The irony of that last possibility wasn't lost on her. The afternoon session was just concluding when Philip slipped her a note. "Chief Wilson on line 2, urgent." Once the courtroom had cleared, Vanessa returned to her chambers and picked up the phone. "Chief Wilson, this is Judge Richardson." "Judge, thank you for taking my call." The chief's voice was tense. I wanted you to hear this from me directly before it hits the news. We've uncovered additional information about Officer Kellerman that complicates the situation. Vanessa felt a chill. What kind of information? During our internal review of his personnel records, we discovered he previously worked for the Riverside County Sheriff's Department in California. He was forced to resign after multiple excessive force complaints. But our background check didn't flag it because there was no formal disciplinary action in his record. He simply resigned before any investigation was completed. So he had a history of this behavior before joining your department, Vanessa said. The implication's clear. Yes, Chief Wilson confirmed, sounding weary. And there's more. We've reviewed all his traffic stops for the past 6 months. The data shows a clear pattern of disproportionately stopping minority drivers, particularly women driving alone at night. The revelation wasn't surprising to Vanessa, but the confirmation was still disturbing. And none of this was caught in your regular performance reviews? There was a long pause. That's the other reason I'm calling. When Lieutenant Hayes mentioned concerns about Kellerman's conduct to his immediate supervisor 2 months ago, the supervisor dismissed it as Hayes being too soft on the community. That supervisor has now been placed on administrative leave as well. A systemic failure, then. Not just one officer, but a breakdown in oversight and accountability. I appreciate you sharing this information, Chief Wilson, Vanessa said. How do you plan to address it publicly? We're preparing a press conference for tomorrow morning. I wanted to give you advance notice and, well, to ask if you'd consider participating. The request took her by surprise. Participating how exactly? Standing with me as I announce a comprehensive review of our department's hiring practices, traffic stop procedures, and supervisory oversight. Your presence would send a powerful message about cooperation and our commitment to meaningful change. It was a bold request, asking the victim of police misconduct to publicly align herself with the department. Politically savvy on the chief's part, but also potentially genuine in its intent. I need to think about this, Chief, she replied. There are ethical considerations given my position, and I would want to review exactly what you're planning to announce before making any decision. Of course, he said quickly. I'll have my office send over the draft announcement right away. After ending the call, Vanessa sat at her desk, contemplating the rapidly evolving situation. What had begun as a frightening personal encounter was expanding into something with potential to create real institutional change, if handled correctly. Her phone rang again. This time it was Congresswoman Washington. Judge Richardson, thank you for taking my call. I've been following what happened, and I want you to know that the Congressional Black Caucus is prepared to support you in whatever way you feel is appropriate. By the time Vanessa left the courthouse that evening, the number of media vans had doubled. She exited through a side entrance guided by courthouse security and drove home with a strange sense of being both at the center of a storm and somehow removed from it at the same time. At home, she finally called her daughter Alexandra and her son David, who worked as an emergency room doctor in Chicago. Both were concerned and angry about what had happened to her. Mom, you need to sue, Alexandra insisted. Make an example of this guy and the whole department. David was more measured. What do you feel is the right thing to do here? Not as a judge, but as yourself? It was a question Vanessa had been asking herself all day, and as she looked at the evening news coverage of her case spreading across the screen, she was still searching for the answer. 2 weeks had passed since the night of the traffic stop. Vanessa sat in her living room, reviewing the final draft of the police department's new training program on her laptop. Outside, the first autumn leaves were beginning to fall, a gentle reminder that the world continued its rhythms regardless of personal upheavals. The past 14 days had been a whirlwind. After careful consideration, Vanessa had declined to appear at Chief Wilson's press conference, choosing instead to release her own measured statement, supporting police reform while maintaining her judicial independence. The decision had been a delicate, balancing act between her personal desire for justice and her professional obligation to remain impartial in matters that might come before her court. Her phone chimed with a text from Congresswoman Washington. Just introduced the Police Accountability and Community Trust Act. Press conference at 2 p.m. Would appreciate your thoughts afterward. The legislation had been in development for months before Vanessa's incident, but her case had given it new momentum. While she couldn't publicly endorse the bill, Vanessa had privately shared her experience with the Congresswoman's staff to help inform the drafting process. The doorbell rang. Vanessa checked her security camera, a new habit since her name and face had been in the news, and saw Lieutenant Hayes standing on her porch. She had been expecting him. "Good morning, Judge Richardson," Hayes said when she opened the door. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "Please come in, Lieutenant," she replied, leading him to her dining room where she had prepared coffee. "I appreciate you coming to my home rather than having this conversation at the courthouse or police station." Hayes seemed uncomfortable in the informal setting, sitting stiffly in the chair she offered. "I wanted to update you personally on the internal investigation. It's complete, and I thought you deserved to hear the findings directly from someone who was there that night." Vanessa poured coffee for them both. "I'm listening." "Officer Kellerman has been terminated," Hayes stated plainly. "The review board found multiple violations of department policy, including excessive force, improper stop procedures, and falsification of the initial report." Vanessa nodded, having anticipated this outcome. "And the supervisor who dismissed your earlier concerns?" 2-week suspension without pay and reassignment to desk duty, pending completion of additional training," Hayes replied. "Not as severe as some of us had hoped, but it's something." "What about criminal charges?" Vanessa asked, though she already knew the answer from her conversations with the district attorney. Hayes looked down at his coffee. "The DA's office reviewed the case and declined to file assault charges. They cited insufficient evidence that Officer Kellerman's actions rose to the level of criminal conduct under state law. It was the expected outcome. Vanessa had seen it countless times in her career. The high bar for criminally charging law enforcement officers meant most cases were handled administratively rather than through the courts. "I understand," she said simply. Hayes seemed relieved by her measured response. "There's something else you should know. Since your case went public, 23 other individuals have come forward with similar complaints about traffic stops. 7 of those cases involved Officer Kellerman, but the others implicate different officers across 3 precincts. This was new information, and it confirmed what Vanessa had suspected, that her experience was part of a pattern, not an isolated incident." "What's being done about those complaints?" she asked. "Each one is being independently investigated," Hayes assured her. "Chief Wilson has brought in an outside agency to handle the reviews to ensure impartiality. And the department is implementing the new traffic stop protocols you helped develop, effective immediately." It was progress, however incremental. Vanessa took a sip of her coffee, considering how to approach the next subject. "Lieutenant, there's something I've been wanting to ask you since that night," she said finally. "Why did you arrive at the scene when you did? Was it coincidence or something else?" Hayes shifted in his seat, looking slightly uncomfortable. "It wasn't coincidence, Judge Richardson. I was monitoring the radio that night and heard Kellerman call in your license plate. Given his history and the location, I had concerns, so I decided to drive by and check the situation." "You were already watching him," Vanessa observed. Hayes nodded slowly. "I'd been keeping an eye on his traffic stops when our shifts overlapped. After my concerns were dismissed by the supervisor, I started documenting patterns on my own time. I just hadn't gathered enough evidence yet to force action. So in a way, my case gave you the leverage you needed." "Yes, ma'am," he admitted, "though I wish it hadn't come at your expense." Their conversation was interrupted by Vanessa's phone ringing. It was Chief Judge Foster. "Excuse me, Lieutenant, I need to take this," Vanessa said, stepping into the kitchen. "Hello, Diane." "Vanessa, the Judicial Council just approved your proposal unanimously," Diane announced without preamble. "The educational program on implicit bias and community relations will be mandatory for all federal judges in our circuit, starting next month." It was the initiative Vanessa had quietly developed in response to her experience, recognizing that bias existed on both sides of the bench. "That's excellent news," she replied. "Thank you for pushing it through." After completing her call, Vanessa returned to find Lieutenant Hayes standing by her living room window, looking at a framed photograph on the bookshelf. Vanessa in her judicial robes on the day of her investiture ceremony, her children beside her beaming with pride. "Your family must be proud of how you've handled all this," Hayes observed. "They've been supportive," Vanessa acknowledged. though my daughter still thinks I should have sued the department and my son believes I've been too forgiving. Hayes turned to face her. And what do you think, Judge? Looking back at everything that's happened since that night, do you feel justice has been served? It was the question Vanessa had been asking herself for 2 weeks. Was terminating one officer enough? Would the new policies truly change the culture? Could any resolution truly make up for those terrifying moments when she'd felt powerless, despite her position and accomplishments? Justice isn't an endpoint, Lieutenant Hayes, she said after a thoughtful pause. It's a process and one that's rarely perfect or complete. What matters is that we keep working toward it, even knowing we may never fully arrive. Later that afternoon, Vanessa sat in her judicial chambers preparing for a sentencing hearing. A young man had pled guilty to drug possession, his third offense, and was facing mandatory minimum sentencing under guidelines that left little room for judicial discretion. As she reviewed the case file, Vanessa thought about power, who had it, who didn't, and how it shaped every interaction in the justice system, from Officer Kellerman's abuse of his authority during a traffic stop to her own limited options in this sentencing. Power and its constraints defined their work. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Philip, her clerk. Judge, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's been waiting for over an hour and says it's important. Her name is Tanya Robinson. The name was vaguely familiar, though Vanessa couldn't immediately place it. Did she say what this is regarding? No, ma'am, just that it's connected to your incident with Officer Kellerman. Curious, Vanessa agreed to a brief meeting before court. A moment later, a young black woman in her early 20s entered the chambers. She was neatly dressed in what appeared to be a restaurant server's uniform, likely coming during her work break. Ms. Robinson, I'm Judge Richardson. How can I help you? Tanya stood nervously, clutching her purse straps. Thank you for seeing me, Your Honor. I saw what happened to you on the news. With that officer, Vanessa gestured for her to sit. You said this was connected to my case somehow? Yes, ma'am. I was stopped by Officer Kellerman 4 months ago. Same situation. Driving home from work at night, he said I didn't signal, but I know I did. He made me get out of the car, searched my vehicle without permission, and when I tried to record with my phone, he grabbed my wrist so hard it bruised. Vanessa felt a chill of recognition. Did you report the incident? Tanya gave a bitter laugh. I tried. Filed a complaint the next day. They took my statement, but I never heard anything after that. When I called to follow up, they said it was unsubstantiated, and there was no video evidence because his camera wasn't working properly that night. One of the unfounded complaints Teresa Garcia had mentioned during their meeting at police headquarters. Except it hadn't been unfounded at all. Ms. Robinson, have you spoken with Lieutenant Hayes or anyone else since the investigation into Officer Kellerman was reopened? No, ma'am, Tanya replied. That's why I'm here. I saw you standing up making them listen. I thought maybe now someone would believe me too. The young woman's words struck Vanessa deeply. Here was the reality of what happened when someone without power or position faced the same misconduct she had experienced. No press conferences, no calls from police chiefs, no immediate investigations, just dismissal and silence. Ms. Robinson, I believe you, Vanessa said firmly, and I'd like to connect you with the independent investigators who are reviewing similar complaints. With your permission, I can have my clerk make that call right now. Relief washed over Tanya's face. Thank you. That's all I wanted, for someone to listen. After making arrangements for Tanya to meet with the investigators, Vanessa walked her to the door. Ms. Robinson, may I ask you one question? Why did you wait until now to come forward again? Tanya paused, considering her answer. When I saw what happened to you, a federal judge, and how Officer Kellerman treated you the same way he treated me, it made me realize something. If he could do that to you, then what happened to me wasn't my fault. It wasn't because of anything I did or didn't do. It was him, the system. And maybe now, because of you, that system might actually listen to people like me. As Vanessa prepared to enter her courtroom an hour later, she thought about Tanya Robinson and the others who had come forward. She thought about the young man she was about to sentence and the constraints she faced in showing mercy under the law. She thought about Lieutenant Hayes trying to create change from within a flawed system. Most of all, she thought about power, not just its abuse, but its potential. The power to speak truth, the power to believe others when they do the same, the power to create change, even when that change comes slowly and imperfectly. Judge Vanessa Richardson straightened her robes and touched the bruises on her wrist. now fading to yellow but still visible. Then she nodded to the bailiff to open the courtroom doors, ready to continue the work of justice, and not as an endpoint, but as a process they were all still struggling to perfect. "All rise," the bailiff called as she entered. The Honorable Judge Vanessa Richardson presiding. She took her seat at the bench, faced the crowded courtroom, and began another day in the ongoing work of making the system more just than it had been before.